calendar. I'm a day behind, so I'm doing yesterday's. Let's see what I'm drinking. Oatmeal stout. I've had oatmeal stout before. I'm hit and miss with it. Ripped out my... This is probably the most exciting part of the video, isn't it? Look, guys, I just want you to know it's coming up on Christmas. And you don't have to get me anything, but you do, because, you know, that's part of the channel. You know, and what I really want, I'm thinking hemorrhoids. I think that's a good gift. Video. Okay, this is better than I thought.
This video is sponsored by Goat Guns, makers of authentic die-cast miniature gun models. Die-cast models of aircraft and tanks have been around forever, but when I came across GoatGuns.com, that's goatguns.com, have a little fun.
Good.
The young men of the 53rd...
By the way, I apologize. This is Battle of Bulge, Part 7. Yesterday I did 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. And I did 1 last week. So that's why I'm doing this. To get caught up with this series, but it's not finished. So, now you know.
Welsh Division are crouching in their foxholes when the early morning air is suddenly filled by the thunder of artillery. Behind them, 25-pounder guns lob high explosive shells over their heads, while unceasing blankets of snow continue to fall around them. The din of heavy guns continues to grow. The landscape ahead of the infantry disappears from view as the terrain is blown to pieces by thousands of high explosives. Finally, at 8 AM, the order is given to advance, and the infantrymen begin their attack. Wading through over 6 inches of snow, the men of the 53rd soon come under intense machine gun and artillery fire. Despite the awesome display of firepower which turns the landscape into a moonscape, the British have a difficult fight on their hands against a determined enemy. The date is the 4th of January 1945, 19 days since the beginning of the last great German offensive of the Second World War. The previous 3 weeks have seen the German advance fought to a standstill, as predominantly American units prevented the Führer's armies from dashing to the Meuse River. Now, the Allied armies in the Ardennes have begun their counterattack against the enemy breakthrough.
Look at all this open space here. Why not push here to make them bring forces around and then push somewhere else? Or is that a ridiculous idea?
By now, Supreme Allied Commander General Dwight Eisenhower and Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery have assembled 705,000 men in the sector, outnumbering the German forces nearly 2 to 1. Montgomery has carefully planned the counteroffensive, with the US First Army pushing south from the area of the Elsenborn Ridge, while General George Patton's Third Army attacks from his positions around Bastogne. Meanwhile, Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks' 30 Corps will have the task of pushing back the westernmost unit in the German-held Bulge. The objective is for all 3 prongs to meet at the heavily defended town of Houffalize. The British 53rd Division, under the command of Major General Bobby Ross, will spearhead 30 Corps' attack. Montgomery's orders are succinct. The 53rd is to be put into battle until it is exhausted. Then I will pull it out immediately and replace it with the 51st Highland Division. The attack begins at 8 AM following the massive artillery barrage, with the objective being to clear German defences from the high ground in front of the towns of Marsch and Hotten. The 116th Panzer Division defends this sector and responds with counter-battery fire to disrupt the British artillery cover for the advance. Although Eisenhower and many senior US commanders urged Montgomery to launch the counter-offensive as soon as possible in order to trap most of the German units in the Ardennes in a massive pocket, the British Field Marshal has delayed until the 4th of January. He believes the worsening weather and the lack of good roads in the area will make the attack a more difficult proposition than originally thought, something the German forces have discovered to their peril.
Moreover, Montgomery abides by the military strategy known as steel, not flesh. He intends to use the Allies' overwhelming advantage in material firepower to smash the enemy before advancing, in an attempt to save as many of his men's lives as possible. With Britain's manpower depleted after years of hard fighting, Montgomery's strategy rests upon putting as few infantrymen in the line of fire as possible. Instead, he and his American counterparts have placed their faith in the colossal manufacturing output of the Allied nations to outproduce and overwhelm the German forces with a seemingly endless stream of artillery, tanks and aircraft.
The attack begins well for the 1st Battalion of the East Lancashire Regiment, who have been tasked with climbing the densely wooded high ground marked on their maps as Ridge 3683. Supported by tanks from 144 Royal Armoured Corps, the East Lancs knock out 4 MG42 nests along with a German self-propelled gun. However, the fighting descends into a confused melee as the British infantry venture deeper into the forest, while the consistent snowfall turns into a blizzard. Whole platoons become separated from each other, and stumble upon enemy positions as both sides attempt to find their bearings in the dark woods. A German self-propelled gun destroys a British Sherman, and machine gun fire inflicts heavy casualties on the advancing infantry, but the veteran East Lancs press the attack. After more hours of chaotic fighting, the British finally capture the ridge and force the Germans to withdraw. On the left side of the advance, the 2nd Battalion of the Monmouthshire Regiment, known to its men as the 2nd Mons, is facing much heavier resistance. One particular German roadblock is proving especially difficult to bypass, as it cannot be easily targeted by artillery fire. To make matters worse, none of the men in the 53rd Welsh Division have been issued winter camouflage due to being rushed to the Ardennes when the German offensive began. As such, their khaki battle dress is easily visible against the snow. German engineers have also hidden shoe mines in the deepest snowdrifts, causing many casualties amongst the advancing 2nd Mons. They will spend most of the 4th of January pinned down, unable to advance past the German roadblock. Most British casualties, however, are caused by frostbite when their wool uniforms freeze. Meanwhile, on Ridge 3683, the men of the 1st East Lancs are digging foxholes as the temperature plunges to -20 degrees Celsius. Miles from the front line, the regimental cooks have prepared hot rations to be loaded onto universal carriers, which set off for the front. The Royal Logistics Corps of the British Army prides itself on going to great and often dangerous lengths to provide one hot meal per day to frontline soldiers, improving morale among fighting men.
That's pretty good.
But the situation in the Ardennes is proving especially difficult. The universal carriers are forced to use the forest trails where they often become stuck. After multiple delays, the regimental quartermaster John Moore asks for volunteers to carry the rations to the front line. Together, they
Make screwing easy by our Snowflake wrench. It comes with 19 kinds of functions. With this snowflake-shaped wrench, screwing, opening beer bottle.
It would be difficult for anyone
together
to reject volunteering to go to the front to take food to your brothers, because man, I'm not doing that. Like, okay, but somebody has to do it for you, so suck it up. No one wants to die, but you know what sucks when you're in freezing cold weather and you're hungry. Man, that warm meal does a lot for your mental state.
They set off into the woods to deliver the meals in person.
Moore and his men form part of the support echelons, one cog in what has become known as the long tail supply line, which keeps the Allied armies fighting. Where the main F echelon comprises fighting units, heavy weapons and armour, A and B echelons follow with ammunition, fuel and rations. Furthermore, field hospitals, engineering, repair and other assets also support the frontline troops. Often a salvageable tank can be repaired on the spot by an Allied mobile workshop vehicle, something the German panzer divisions lack with the same effectiveness. The crew of the Sherman tank knocked out in the earlier engagement will likely receive a new vehicle within hours to continue the fight. Replacement tanks driven by men of the Royal Armoured Corps Delivery Regiment aim to arrive just hours after the loss of an armoured vehicle, ensuring that frontline units are always fighting at combat strength. Conversely, German crews of knocked-out tanks often have little logistical support and will often just become riflemen after the loss of their vehicle. When looking at the European campaign, unlike the Germans, no British or American tank crew or tank battalion was ever short of support.
Nice.
After a long trudge through the deep snow, Moore and his volunteers arrived to drop off the rations to the hungry frontline troops. Throughout the war, the men of the Royal Logistics Corps risked their lives to ensure that the regular infantrymen would never go hungry, no matter the situation.
But I bet you all those soldiers that were fed, they loved every single one of those guys who put their life on the line to get them that food. They probably would have done everything they could to help those guys.
Though the stew has now gone cold in the -20-degree temperatures, Moore has a special present for the men. As the Division War Diary later recalls, Moore struggled up to the rifle companies with a warming cargo of rum. The rum raises the men's spirits considerably, despite the appalling weather. General Ross orders the next attack to begin before sunrise on the 5th of January. A ferocious artillery barrage begins at 6 AM, as British heavy guns fire 5,820 shells against the German positions. Unfortunately, the extreme cold causes many of the shells to fall short among the forward infantry regiments, causing casualties from friendly fire. Desperate to get the attack moving, the RAF ground controller with the 2nd Mons calls in Hawker Typhoons to conduct rocket strikes against the roadblock.
During the Italian campaign, British air and ground forces have worked together to implement a new system for precision airstrikes known as Visual Control Point, or VCP. Accompanying most units is what is known as a rover, an experienced RAF ground controller who will travel in an armoured vehicle with his radio tuned to the correct squadron frequency. The controller acts as a liaison who can translate the situation on the ground to the pilots above, in order to relay proper instructions in pilot language, a powerful operational level capability. RAF Typhoons orbit near the battlefield until called upon to attack ground targets by the rovers.
It takes just minutes for a flight of 4 Typhoons to appear overhead, while British artillery fires red smoke rounds to identify the target. The fearsome ground attack aircraft begin their attack run, screaming through the dense clouds towards the red smoke. At just 200 feet altitude, the Typhoons launch 8 RP-3 air-to-ground rockets each, the explosions throwing up dirt and snow as they smash into the enemy position. The aircraft peel off and circle back around for a gun run, now firing their 20mm cannons. With the Typhoons engaged, another wing of Typhoons will arrive on station at the standby orbit within minutes to replace them, maintaining a constant state of readiness to respond to further calls for airstrikes from the front line. Now out of ammunition, the aircraft turn for their base to rearm and refuel for their next mission. The 2nd Mons once again launch into the attack. Unfortunately, this Typhoon strike has been unable to fully neutralise the enemy position. The British infantrymen are once again caught out in the open and take heavy machine gun and artillery fire. It is at this moment that General Ross must make a pragmatic decision whether to continue the attack. British public opinion weighs heavily on the minds of many senior commanders, who bitterly remember the slaughter of the Great War. The British people are reluctant to once again throw the lives of their sons away in tactical situations where there is little to gain, and as a democratic country, the military will be held accountable for misusing Britain's dwindling manpower. Faced with mounting casualties, the attack is called off and the 2nd Mons are replaced on the line by the Divisional Reserve. Only 3 days later, on the 8th of January, will the 116th Panzer Division finally be ejected from the well-defended roadblocks. In the middle of the 53rd Division sector, 7th Battalion of the Royal Welsh Fusiliers are preparing to attack towards the village of Grimbiamore, when they are suddenly hit by a vicious artillery barrage. Despite the overall superiority of Allied artillery, they are actually outnumbered by German heavy guns in this sector of the Ardennes. At 5:30 PM, 400 men and several tanks of the 116th Panzer Division launch a strong counterattack against the Fusiliers. Without tank support, the British infantry fire back with Piat anti-tank weapons to try and stop the enemy advance. Yet, the Germans are determined to recapture the high ground of Ridge 3683 and press their early advantage. D Company of the Fusiliers on the left is soon overrun, leaving only 18 survivors, while C Company in the centre is forced into a fighting withdrawal. With the British line buckling under the pressure of the enemy assault, the Welsh Fusiliers NCOs take charge to prevent a breakthrough. Command Sergeant Major Stiff rallies the survivors of D Company to stand and fight, which encourages C Company to also halt their withdrawal. As the German troops continue to close in, Major Tomlinson of D Company calls in an indirect fire artillery barrage on his original forward positions. He liaises with the forward observation officer for the nearby artillery battery. Much like the RAF ground controller, the FOO acts as the forward eyes of the battery commander and requests the fire mission. At incredibly
opportunity, because we have been using farmer's dog for a long time. My wife
Awesome.
cannot stop talking about it.
Sounds
as
great.
is.
All right, we are going to.
Shh, I don't care.
At incredibly short notice, and at precisely the right moment, 25-pounder guns rain accurate hell from above on the attacking German forces. Under such overwhelming firepower, the attackers are forced to withdraw. Once again, outstanding Allied operational capabilities have made the difference between victory and defeat. The British lines on the ridge have held firm. Other attacks by the 53rd Division have mixed results. The east flanks are reinforced by M29 Weasel small tracked transport vehicles, which have better traction on the icy roads and trails. Buoyed by a pause in the snow, the east flanks manage to penetrate within sight of Grünbiemel before they are stopped. The frigid weather closes in once again, cutting off close air support and causing frostbite casualties to skyrocket. General Ross launches more attacks over the next 2 days, but Field Marshal Montgomery recognises that his men are exhausted. By the end of the 8th of January, the division is fought out and pulled off the line to refit before the expected push into Germany itself. The 51st Highland Division now takes its place to continue the counter-offensive. The doctrine of steel not flesh is replicated across the front as American and British forces use their combined artillery strength and mastery of the skies above the battlefield to slowly grind down the German defence. On the 15th of January alone, the American 30th Infantry Division expends over 11,000 shells in capturing the small town of Thirimore, which is left in ruins by the intense bombardment.
Yeah.
The overwhelming firepower eventually breaks the enemy resistance, and the German forces are gradually forced to pull back out of the Bulge. The British contribution at the Battle of the Bulge should be noted, as over 111,000 men took part in the counter-offensive.
Wow.
1,408 men became casualties, many of these from the 53rd Welsh Division. The efficient Allied supply lines lost effectiveness as a result of the particularly harsh winter. Captain Llewellyn Williams of the Ox and Bucks Regiment later recalled that those 3 days are not likely to be forgotten by anyone who experienced them. Conditions were appalling: intense cold, deep snow, and the eerie darkness of the forest. Any woodland trucks were rigidly glazed with ice, impossible to maintain supplies of food and ammo. The Battle of the Bulge has challenged the British and American desire to use steel, not flesh. A massive thanks to this week's guest narrator, historian.
Wow. I don't think this series is done. I think this video came out 4 days ago. So I will keep checking in to see when it's finished. But that is the Battle of the Bulge so far. I hope you've enjoyed it, as I have. Yeah, pretty good. So I just was looking at all the books down here, just reading those. All right, I'm gonna end this here. Like and subscribe, or you're gonna wake up with one of those little, those little hand stick blenders. You hold them up here and they come down. They've got like a little stick and then a little circle at the end, a little tiny thing. You just you're gonna wake up with one of those turned on, right in your butthole, and it's just gonna. You're just gonna I think you'll probably, it'll be painful. I think, maybe, I don't know.